everybody. Welcome to episode 76 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian finishing my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts in running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and the listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this weekend to listeners Danny in Ontario, Aru in North Carolina, Anna in Texas, and Summer in Kentucky. Summer reached out through email, and her feedback really gives me a sense of how listeners prioritize which episodes they pick and the reflection that comes after they listen. And so I want to share some of Summer's email right now. She said, quote, I began by listening to random episodes. I especially love and was grateful for your episode on how to support English language learners in the school library, episode number 63. I was so impressed by this. I have been an ELL teacher for the last 4 years, and I love it when educators go out of their way to support these students. Even when I was in grad school, I knew I wanted to build a library that supported speakers of other languages. So thank you for adding an episode about this. I took lots of notes on it, and I plan to take it with me to my first library job. She continues, I also love the episode on Reader's Choice, episode 59. I adored the article you mentioned, quote, we're pressuring students to read too much, too fast, too soon, unquote. I came to a school district that is very strict about reading levels and only allowing students to read books within their range. I didn't see a problem with this until I started grad school and began reading all the research that supports free choice. I had no idea how many restrictions on reading could actually harm students and their love of books, but it makes perfect sense, and now I'm a huge supporter of free choice. And I actually cringe when I see teachers and or school libraries placing limitations on students' reading choices. I desperately want to change this about my school district. However, my current administrator is not very open to new ideas about anything. So I doubt I would have much luck in changing her mind about this. But the upside is, when I do go into my first library job, I can advocate for free choice as much as possible. I can't stand the idea of students growing to dislike reading all because of restrictions placed on them. After listening to random episodes, I was so impressed with your information and your ideas that I finally just started from the beginning. I began to notice that many of the things you discuss in these episodes are actually things that I learned about in grad school. I also remember you mentioning that collection development was one of your favorite classes in grad school, and it was for me too. I had a huge project that involved taking specific sections of a library and giving it an overhaul. It was a lot of work, but I love doing it, and I can't wait when I'm actually a librarian. I just finished episode number 7 about collaboration. I love this episode too, because when I interview for a library position, I want to be able to talk about specific collaboration strategies. And Summer finishes by saying, I'm currently looking for a school librarian position because that is my true passion. I'm hoping to officially be a school librarian start of the next school year. Parentheses, depending on if we even have a normal school year due to COVID-19, end parentheses. With the combination of my training in grad school along with your exceptional podcast, I feel confident going to my first job as a school librarian. And then she asks me a question. Summer continues, I mentioned that I'm a supporter of free choice in school libraries. If I'm hired in a school district where free choice is not supported, how do you think it is appropriate to approach this administration about changing this? Does it depend on just how strict or open-minded the administration is? And if this question were to come up during a job interview, what's the best way to answer? Of course, I want the principals to like me and offer me the job, but what if I don't agree? What if they don't agree with free choice? Do I stick to my guns for lack of better words, tell them what they want to hear? So, friends, that was a lot, but Summer really helped me understand when listeners come to the podcast for the very first time, what kinds of things they're thinking. And I want to tell you right now, I replied to Summer's email immediately, and I'd like to think that the advice I gave her was helpful in responding to some of these types of interview questions she might have. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or with the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And yes, friends, I do keep international postage on hand, and so I'm always ready to impress my mail carrier with the letters that I put out in my mailbox every day. Originally, I scheduled today's episode on Kinders in the Library and an interview with Rebecca Gerdes. As luck would have it, she just wrapped up her school year, and Friday was her last day. So I decided we should probably record her conversation when she isn't also trying to shut down her library. Friends, I am so fortunate to be able to call upon Casey Boyd for a third time this season for today's episode, #Good Trouble and Advocacy. If you haven't heard Casey's first two episodes, I've included the links in today's show notes. We first met Casey in November with episode 51, Boss Librarian, and she shared her inspiring journey as a school librarian in Chicago and in Washington, D.C. In February, Casey gave us a behind the scenes to her experience serving on this year's Newbery committee. I asked her every question that came to mind, including the incredibly tacky ones. It should come as no surprise that there are some listeners who are now bound and determined to serve on this committee. And now, my interview with Casey Boyd. Casey Boyd, I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast for a third time. And I know listeners are going to really glean a great deal of perspective from your words. And I'm just very happy that you have found some time to share with all of us, because it really is a message which is best delivered from you yourself. You've been incredibly busy, and since distance learning is the norm right now, not only just in this country, but around the world, how are you remotely supporting your students during these times of COVID?
Very carefully and very strategically. It's not easy. It's not easy to capture them online. We have asynchronous instruction that takes place at my school. And then we also have face-to-face instruction. So there's options for the students. So sometimes if I go into a class with another teacher, sometimes I'm able to directly interact with the students. And then in some cases, it's a recording, So I am keeping my ears and eyes open at all times. We use Microsoft Teams as a platform for my school. However, I'm going to kind of spill the beans on this. We also use Instagram as a secondary method of communicating with students. So there I set up office hours. I also have, if you go, especially on my website, I have a Follow Destiny landing page, and I also have also to my website where it's virtual learning, where you can get into the different platforms. I created some Google Docs for students, for teachers, and for parents in the very beginning, because the first couple of weeks were that data dump where everybody's just like sharing all the free stuff they're finding online. I just curated a list that was great for my school community. And then I separated them. I knew that I have a lot of kids that are into comics and graphic novels, for example. I found a lot of material online that's free and they can access. So, placing these type of help aids online was important. Creating some tutorials around ebook access, how to get on not only the Follett catalog, but also to use the D.C. Public Library free resources that are there. I've done some read alouds, and they're twofold. I wanted the read alouds also for my students who are babysitting younger brothers and sisters. So I'm going to continue to do that over the weeks to come. I got delayed with a lot of things going on with advocacy work in DC. And then I just drop into classes and advisories from time to time, to support instruction, as well as also provide those tutorials on how to use some online tools. So yeah, busy and very carefully strategic work.
Well, and I appreciate the phrase data dump, because I think that so many families were they were sort of bombarded with, teachers, well-intentioned educators who were like, and here's this, and here's this, and here's this. And it really did, I think, shock many families. And I know that as a curator, our role was really put to task in the beginning of our remote learning. You mentioned Instagram, and I participated in one of your PDs. When I know that you've offered PD and using Instagram as the platform. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I am a firm believer in marketing and branding your library program. And I have observed that a lot of librarians were struggling in this area just to get the attention of kids, and my suggestion was use a digital platform, a social media platform to capture their attention. So I like Instagram for this reason, is that it's one of the best picture sharing sites that's online. And it's heavily accessible, not only by students, but by parents as well. So I'm able to tell a story sometimes of what I'm doing in the library program, even without, having a very long caption or narrative, attached to that image. So they also have some of the best graphics and animations online, and they're always updated. Like for COVID-19, they have like some animations that say, stay at home, wash your hands, social distancing, and it's cool that you have these gifs and animations and JPEG images that you can use. So that's why I kind of stick with Instagram,
Well, I think it really just gives your audience a better appreciation that you are aware that they're more visually tuned into your message. And I think your delivery matters, not just the information you're giving your students, but how you deliver that message, and being tuned in to the fact that Instagram may be better received, not just by your students, but by their families as well, because this has been a fantastic, you want to talk about a silver lining. I've been able to communicate more directly with my families than ever before. And I really am excited, because I think that for the first time, I'm getting, letters and emails of support from families saying, I really appreciate that you're doing this. And we did this week because you told us about it. And I thought, well, that's incredibly validating. And you better believe I CC'd my administrator on it, because as we will talk about later, we do have a principal problem. So I do want to visit that idea. But I was absolutely one of the most amazing hours I spent watching YouTube this week. Your leadership has been recognized most recently on May 14th, AASL's office hours broadcasted on YouTube. And friends, I've included a link in the show notes, and I really want to encourage you to experience this hour for yourself, because you, Casey, gave a presentation on microaggressions. And listeners, we owe it to ourselves, and I want to say this very sincerely, as human beings walking this planet, that you need to watch this presentation. And don't do this while you're making dinner. Don't do this while you're folding laundry. Give it your full attention, because our students need this. We are educators, and we need to be able to support our coworkers. And listening to Casey's words is really something that we need to listen to and think about and reflect, because the words we use have meaning. And the microaggressions, which Casey shared and explained in detail, are going to affect how you interact with people everywhere. Casey, I want to know, how did this opportunity come about? Can you share that with us?
Well, actually, it was brought to me. I had a lot of interactions with Megan Rose, who was with AASL. We were both on award-winning committees this past year. I was on Newbery. She was on Coretta Scott King. And we always have seen each other at conferences, and always very cordial, friendly with one another. And she reached out to me because she was doing some committee work, her and Erica Long. And in doing that committee work with the president of AASL, Mary Keeling, they had the office hours, and they're focusing on one of the target areas by ALA, which is equity, inclusion, and diversity. And that's really the goal of that office hours program, is that they meet together and they have different topics that they discuss. Well, they said that they wanted me to speak about microaggressions because it came up in a previous session that it was important and it needed to be discussed more openly. And they asked me if I could talk about this, and I said, okay, I can talk about it, but I'm going to be very blunt with you. I am not going to hold back, and I'm going to be raw, and I could really potentially offend people, but these are conversations that must take place if you really want to do a deep dive into microaggressions, especially racial microaggressions. And they said yes. So I applaud them, because this was a risk that an organization is taking. This is also a risk that the president was taking, because it could potentially be problematic for her presidency. I'm just going to keep it real. But yet at the same time, it's an important topic that any organization needs to have.
Well,
and so
yeah, not just for librarians.
Exactly. Any organization needs to have these types of conversations across the board, so that's how it came about. And I would like to make a correction. When you're giving these type of webinars, I have a tendency to really be detailed with my slides. And sometimes I'm thinking so far ahead, I get brain fog while I'm giving a presentation. And I did not really explicitly say where my racial microaggressions support came from in terms of that one pager that was mentioned in the slides. Also, too, I misquoted the great late Senator Shirley Chisholm. It was not Fannie Lou Hamer, because I was reading something on Fannie Lou Hamer, so she was sticking in my brain at the time. But Shirley Chisholm, see, I almost went there again. Shirley Chisholm famously said, if there is not a seat at the table, you need to bring a folding chair. So in other words, you need to insert yourself into many conversations and be present and be active on whatever's going on. So yeah, those are two little corrections that I have from the session, along with I got brain freeze on the work of Shonda Rhimes, which I feel really bad about. Scandal, and it's just, when you're giving these types of presentations, you're just thinking ahead and your mouth is moving extremely fast, and so you forget. So my fault.
I really do appreciate, because anytime we put ourselves out there, there are risks that we take, and misspeaking and brain freeze. The nice thing is that I usually get to go back and edit those things out. And when you're being recorded on an office hour, the stakes are higher. And I am more than happy to share anything regarding your presentation with listeners today, because the presentation really is one which everybody should just absorb and reflect upon. And you did acknowledge from the very get-go, this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. And just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean we don't have it. It means we do have it. And a lot of, I'm going to just say this. I read the chart that you referenced, and listeners, I've put this chart in our show notes, and I want to make sure that you quietly and in a private place read each of the examples, and then think about, is there and has there been a time in our lives that we have said something similar? And I am not just embarrassed to admit this. I'm ashamed to admit this, because I can think back to a microaggression I committed, and I know I was 13 years old. And I think that shame will stay with me as an important reminder, because when you waltz around life with privilege, like I do, it really is important to be not just sensitive, but be incredibly aware of what we say, the words we use. And I want to say this, what you shared were painful and upsetting experiences. But you did that in an act of generosity, because I can't think of a more impactful way to make your point.
Yeah. It's, as I referenced in the webinar, when people share their experiences of microaggressions, just believe them. And one of the problems on the flip side is that experiencing these microaggressions and being in different environments where if I say something, I know I'm not going to be believed. Sometimes it's just not even worth the aggravation and the headache to bring it up. Now, I know there's a double statement on what I'm about to say. In just turning 50, I don't have a lot of patience for things anymore.
And listeners, Casey and I both are turning 50 this year. So I will join you and I will agree with you that when you become a woman of a certain age, there's a certain amount of nonsense that you are not going to tolerate, just because at this point it isn't about being well-liked or winning friends or being popular and those things that might have mattered when I was 20. Right. But I do feel that there is a certain amount of honesty that we must have, and that begins with ourselves.
It really is, and it's tough, because I have spoken up and out before when I was younger, and when I was in in environments where when I did speak up and out, I would just brace myself for the doubt that comes with it, and then the argument, and then the questions that come that try to flip what I have said into, well, you really don't know what you're talking about, or you're making this up, and that's insulting in itself, and when I was younger, I would really pick and choose when I would really speak up, but our environments have changed tremendously, where now people of color feel more comfortable with speaking up. And I think that's why there's an awakening that's taken place over the last couple of years, that, you see a lot of things, and I'll talk about this a little further, as we continue on, that you see more outspoken acts that are taking place, and it's shocking to people, but believe them when they say it, it's true.
And for better or for worse, social media has given people not only this sort of brazenness to speak out, but you are now held accountable to the comments, which in some cases people are rather flippant and will simply casually say something and clearly have not put any substantial thought into what they're broadcasting on their social media. And I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm just saying that it is for better or for worse, because there are people who say things that reveal their ignorance. And then you have an audience which has felt rather empowered to call them on it. And it hopefully opens their eyes to their own ignorance. And I see this working both ways. Hate gets broadcast, but those corrections quickly come in as well. You get called out on your hate.
You certainly do. And like AASL did something which was smart. They turned the comments off on the YouTube posting of this webinar, and which was a smart thing to do, in my opinion, because, sometimes you can hide behind a keyboard with your ignorance, and your racism too, so it was a good thing that they did that, because also too, that would have aggravated me as a speaker and as an African-American woman, that someone came on there and said something negative. So, sometimes we have to censor certain people that are around us to prevent them from, even having a voice, because we know that they're going to be ignorant and silly and offensive to other people. So,
well,
yeah.
and I think that in fairness, this, you and I can have our conversation absent of comments. And I think that would only distract from the message that you have been generous enough to share. And I think we need to give attention to the focus of this conversation, and that was the office hours. And again, listeners, when you listen to Casey's presentation, please give it the courtesy that it deserves, and devoid of your, try to free yourself from the basket of laundry or the emptying of the dishwasher or all the other things you can do while you're listening to a YouTube presentation. I'd like to pivot. And that is because you have been the model of advocacy when it comes to your own personal issues with the D.C. Public Schools and the school librarians. Friends, if you haven't followed Casey on social media, I highly recommend you do, because you would be aware of the situation in DC. Can you talk about, and perhaps give us a timeline of what is happening in the DC Public Schools with regards to school librarians?
Back in February, we had a director that resigned. He was a director of technology and library programming. And it was at that time he warned us that you all really do need to organize, because central office has a different plan for library programming that you wouldn't believe. So at that point, we started to see some little, signs that something was amiss. And we began organizing. And in organizing, we had to take some really hard looks at each other. One is that we had to really get people to be a little bit more involved. We had to identify people that were afraid, and this is something that they've never seen. They're afraid to speak up because they didn't want to have any problems coming to them. And we had to be respectful of that. We also had to identify the people that wouldn't be afraid to speak up, and then I should say number 4 is that having everyone understand the severity of what's going on. And that was the toughest part, because some people had never experienced this. I haven't had experienced it before. There were some members of the profession within the ranks that had experienced the threats back in 2013, roughly. So they kind of knew, but they saw that this was much, much more serious than that threat in 2013. So as a result of that, we started a social media campaign, started a hashtag, DC DCPS needs librarians, and just started posting wonderful things that we were doing in our library programming. We teamed up with the Washington Teachers Union and also Every Library. And between the two organizations, they have yielded us the greatest amount of support in advocacy. WTU put us at the table to interact directly with the chancellor. Every library provided support through petitioning and also contacting all of their support networks within specifically the Washington, D.C. area, because in D.C., our councilmen vote on education policy. So they were targeting a lot of those supporters of those councilmen. So informing the community was a really, really, really key point as well in this advocacy. And WTU and Every Library helped in that respect. Black Caucus of the American Library Association came in, and they also drove the point through that this is a racial and equity issue that was taking place because the majority of the initial cuts were taking place across the river. And if you're familiar with the DC area, across the river is a primarily Black and Brown community and low income. So we're looking at all these aspects, and then COVID-19 took place. Librarians in DC really stood up and took charge. They really initiated training of students, teachers, and parents on using all the digital content that the district expected us to use, because a lot of our people had not been trained on using this digital content. They were also there to provide additional online support, just navigating some of these sites. We were present in distributing devices to our community. Not only that, we have librarians that are delivering books, basic supplies, hand sanitizer, foods, chips, treats for the kids who are depressed, and stuck in the house. There are a lot of librarians in the system that are doing these things. And we recorded all this activity and put it on social media. We created a DCPS Librarians Google site. There we have personal testimonies of teachers, parents, students that appreciate their librarian. Not only that, we had personal testimonies from the librarians about why they became a librarian. And then the culminating event was that we just finished the I Love My Library Media Specialist contest. It was an essay and poster contest for K through 12th grade students, and the WTU and also Washington Teachers Union and every library contributed $500 each in prize money for the kids. So this was aligned with School Library Media Month, as well as National Teachers Week, National Library Week. So it was great timing. And then the piece of resistance was AASL's president and the American Library Association's president, Wanda Brown and Mary Keeling, both wrote letters of support that were sent directly to the mayor of DC, who is over the school board, the council, the chancellor, and also all of our council members, informing them that it was appalling that this school district, as an urban school district, was leading urban school districts in the last 3 years in reading achievement and gains in reading. And why would you want to dismiss library programming? So with all of that, when the players sat down at the table, it turned out that the previous cuts stayed in place, but there were no additional cuts after the mayor's budget came down. We were thinking the mayor's budget would cause DCPS to totally eliminate library programs, and it didn't happen, praise God. But there's still work to be done. There are librarians without a position and students that don't have a librarian. There's going to be some internal movement. I'm very, very optimistic that the librarians that lost their positions, they will be able to volley and jock to another open position within the district. Our biggest challenge is going to come, Amy, next year. They're going to per pupil capita funding base. And when they do that, that could wipe out some library programming. So, for example, the school gets a lump sum from central office to pay for all salaries in the building. And if you have multiple degrees like myself, I have 3 master's degrees working on a doctorate, I'm considered an expensive employee. My principal may say, you're too expensive. I have to cut your position down to part-time just to keep you here. Or you have the option of leaving and going somewhere else. But if you're an expensive employee in a per pupil capita funding based type of school environment, it's difficult for you to get hired. Case in point, look at what happened to Chicago Public Schools. They went to that funding base. A lot of librarians got cut. So, and remember, when we get our degrees, it's master's degrees. So you have to pay for a master's degree. So it's going to get to the point of principals are going to be looking for essentially cheap education employees. That's where it comes down to.
Well, and you just shake your head, because how is getting somebody who is as green and a rookie hire best serving our student population. And I'm not throwing shade on new hires.
Exactly.
There's a lot of fun to be had working with new hires because they are some of the most amenable when it comes to working and appreciating that working with a librarian can, lighten your load immensely. But to say to discount the experience and the time that we have put into getting master's degrees. And I'm sorry, but in the state of Michigan, if you don't get your master's degree, at some point, your certification will not be, they really sort of box you into, thou shalt get an advanced degree, or we will not extend your certification any farther. Right. And, from a financial standpoint, it doesn't make sense to linger with a BA and not take advantage of the opportunity to enhance our own training and expertise to get a master's degree. So it really is counterintuitive.
But you know what? But the other end of that is state certification boards are saying, hey, you have to go back and you have to get additional hours or CPDUs, or credits. Well, it's like you do exactly what they tell you to do, but then you get axed because it causes for your salary to go up. So are you now saying, yeah, go back and get your hours, additional university credit hours, and don't apply them to your salary? I mean, if I worked to get the degree, I have the right to be paid for that expertise that I gained that I bring into the classroom. And all these parents, they want highly effective teachers.
My first library position, I was replaced by the PTO president who was going to be making $9.50 an hour.
Oh my God.
With no training. And I'll be honest, taking care of the library was like number 9 on her list of job responsibilities. And she was making less than $10 an hour. I did leave that district. I was so upset and I sought greener pastures. But when you appreciate what training and how much goes into a master's in library science, it is appalling. I am so blown away by just how incredibly thorough your campaign was and how you reached out in many different platforms across the board and really included everyone in your efforts to make sure that these jobs were protected. I did see a campaign that went out with every library. And if you've been on social media, every library is working to raise awareness of our plight, not just in the D.C. area, but across the country as well. I want to sort of broaden this conversation about advocacy because the things that you did really demonstrate a concerted effort on the part of the librarians in your district. You mentioned that we have a principal problem in your, and I laughed out loud. And it was so funny when you said we have a principal problem. I said, no, we have an administration problem because I think it goes back to central office. It is not just do our principals appreciate and know the breadth of what we bring to our buildings, but does the administration, the decision makers, the ones who are creating the budgets in the first place? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, in DC, it really is a principal problem. And I do agree with you. Yes, it's a central office issue, too, because when superintendents and principals alike are going through their certification programs, they rarely reference the skill set, the programming benefits of having a robust school library program. Okay. Now, in the case of DC their principals have been given full autonomy on making decisions whether or not they should have certain positions in their building. This is where the disconnect is, in my opinion, is that a lot of my principals that are in this district have never worked with a librarian. They have never experienced a robust library program. They don't really know the skill set of a school librarian. And I'm going to use my principal as an example. when we first met, he said, listen, I've never worked with a certified librarian. And I said, okay, I'll show you what the benefits are of having a certified librarian and how it will impact student achievement. 3 years later, he has a different view, and it's respectful. Yes, we disagree on some things. I get on his nerves. He gets on my nerves. But at the end of the day, we both respect one another, and he respects the program. And that's all that I can ask for.
Well, and you're right that this takes an investment of time, that this is a relationship building at its best, because you recognize that you're working with somebody who doesn't fully appreciate all the that you bring to your program. But you also recognize that you can say that now 3 years into this relationship, that you have worked to make sure that your principal appreciates and is aware, and you broadcast those kinds of that kind of good news. And in you looking good, you make him look good.
Exactly. And he follows me religiously on Instagram. So he knows what I'm doing.
As well, he should. You are up to good trouble. Hashtag good trouble. And friends, if you haven't heard my first conversation with Casey Boyd back in November of 2019, the hashtag good trouble comes from Congressman and civil rights hero John Lewis. And I think that for this reason, I want to always have an appreciation of the things that you are doing, because you're always doing them with your students in mind, with your program in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is, it's a challenge, if I could say.
I also would like to delve a little bit into the quote we mentioned earlier, and I've heard it as, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And but let's give credit where credit's due. I'll let you expand on this, but Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Exactly. Because you have to, as my aunt in Louisiana says, buffalo your way to the table. Buffalo your way to the table. I have walked, and this is, and I'm about to say this is not about Jefferson Academy. This is over 20 years of experience. Okay. I've walked past rooms on my way out the building for the day, and had to back up to the opening of the door. And I'm like, wait a minute, you all are talking about literacy? You didn't invite me? And guess what I do? Stop, walk right in and sit down. And it's uncomfortable because they're embarrassed, like, oh God, we forgot to invite her. Or it's, damn, we were trying to do this on our own and we didn't want to involve her.
I don't think either is a good situation. I think that they should know better by now working with you. And I feel this way, especially because I feel it is the best way we can advocate directly with people when they forget that we have so much to contribute to these conversations.
Exactly.
I know I've sort of forced my way. My hand goes up. I look like Hermione Granger on Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone with my hand up in the air, because every time they're asking for, do I have somebody who wants to be on this committee? Do I have somebody who wants to be on this committee? And it always has to do with big picture building initiatives. And my hand goes up in the air and I'm like, I want to be a part of this conversation. And especially because I work with all of your students. I'm always been big picture because I'm working with your littles. I'm working with the kids who are the oldest kids in the building, everybody in the middle, and I work with all your teachers.
That's right.
So, it stands to reason that you bring the librarians into these conversations because they have the perspective that perhaps the third grade teacher doesn't have. They have the perspective that maybe, your reading specialist wants to know, but you bring with you the collection that you represent. And all too often these decisions involve making purchases and you're like, excuse me, how about you talk to somebody who knows about the resources we have in the library, and not just the resources your building has. As you said, the public library has resources which all too often are not recognized by educators because they don't think of the public library as a resource.
Exactly.
All right.
And that's where we come in. We connect people to the resources. And I think sometimes we get lost in translation of, oh, okay, I could just look it up on Google. Well, you know what? ask me and I can save you so much time.
Well, and I will mention, Amanda Jones and I recently talked about OERs, Open Educational Resources, because districts have become embroiled in legal matters unnecessarily because had a librarian been at the table when curriculum decisions were being made, they could have saved themselves a lot of pain and legal fees and damages, because librarians also recognize that some resources like open access, open educational resources would allow districts to avoid the pain of going through legal proceedings when copyright has been violated. I mean, that's really just a pointed example. You recently posted a terrific infographic, and friends, of course, it's in the show notes. Take a look at it. It's from the Pennsylvania School Librarian Association, and it highlights how we are valuable to our school communities, not just in real life when our buildings are open and our libraries are accessible, but also virtually. And you and I could talk about this for another hour, but is there something about this infographic that really speaks to you?
Everything that's on this graphic really hits home. I believe it was written by the Pennsylvania School Library Media Association, but also there's one person that they singled out. I think her name is Allison Mackley, and it's just on time and it's perfect, especially in our virtual learning environment. Adapt, navigate, shape, connect, include. I mean, just all of it in terms of these are the things that we do. We empower, we instruct, we bring value through the curation. We link to literacy, and then we foster equity and belonging, especially these kids that are just struggling, on the social emotional level. This is a great one. It has great language that you can use in any argument that you have, whether it be with the teachers, the principal, the district. Well, I mean, it's perfect.
And listeners, I recommend, this is one of the ones that you print and you tape up to your wall, and you use it as just a little personal checklist to remind you. And I spoke about this earlier on an episode I did last spring about self-advocacy, because we as school librarians are the resource as much as our rooms and our space and our collections. We bring so much when it comes to what we can offer to our buildings and our students and our school community. And this sort of encapsulates all of those skills so nicely. Print it in color, just laminate it and put it up there as a reminder and say, yeah, I do all those things. How can I do those things in a way that is more apparent to my school community? All right. So let me ask you, I was just having this realization. I'd like to hear your take. In order to be effective advocates for our profession, we have to be risk takers, as you've said. We have to be proactive, and we have to do things that in some respects, like you said, with some of your peers, I mean, it's scary to speak up to defend your jobs. It's not enough that we feel passionately about our programs, and it's not enough that we just do our jobs every day. And, I find that overwhelming, that we can't, it's a reality that all of us face. We can't just sit back and do our jobs and know our jobs will always be fine.
I always have said this: everybody can be a librarian, or they think that they can be a librarian, until it's time to put the books on the shelf and organize them, and then that's when people start dropping off like flies. We have to work on our image. We need to speak up more and say, this is what I do. We need to toot our own horn more. That's a big one right there. And some people may view it as, I'm being too boastful. No, you need to advocate and say, this is what I do. And you don't have to verbalize it. You can put that in social media, and that message will carry so far greater than what you could ever say. I feel like if you're going to enter into this field of library information science, whether it's school, public, academic, or special libraries, you're going to develop into a vocal advocate. By nature, I am a shy person. I'm very introverted. A lot of people have a hard time believing that, but libraries changed my personality it shifted it where I am a far more outspoken person. Now, sometimes I amaze myself with things I say because my introverted self is like, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to get involved. But I know that for the long haul, it takes many voices to get that point across, especially if our district and our state stakeholders that make these decisions. So it's important to advocate for your profession, to be proud of it, to say, I love this job and it's the best job on the planet. And that's something that I start my presentations with. I'm a school library media specialist and it's the best job on the planet. It may sound corny, but it also demonstrates I love what I do.
Well, I'm going to just let you have the last word because, friends, I'm getting emotional and I can't think of a better person to share with listeners today. Casey Boyd, it is always a delight. I learn so much from you every day, and to have these conversations and, more importantly, to be able to share them, it truly means a great deal to me and to the listeners who have this opportunity to join us today. Would you please let our listeners know where we can follow you on social media?
Well, thank you again for allowing me to come on and speak so freely. I appreciate it. I can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at boss_librarian. So that's where you'll find me. I also have a website. It's kcboyd.com. And I need to update it. But that's where a lot of my content is. And now that things have kind of calmed down a little bit here, I'm on the Reopen D.C. Task Force for Education. Once I get done with that project, there's a lot of stuff that has been thrown to the side. I'm going to do some updating, and that's one of them. So check back periodically.
You are a true inspiration, and you have an open invitation to join us on the podcast anytime you want in season 3. And
sure thing.
I wish you the absolute best as you bring the school year to a close. And I hope you have an opportunity to curl up and read a book, because I know right now, deep down, that's all you want to do.
Exactly. Thank you again. It's a pleasure to come on and speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so grateful to Casey Boyd for sharing her advocacy strategies and for making good trouble, all in the name of supporting our students and school community. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be virtual reading culture and my interview with Melissa Tom. I hope you will tune in.